Nobody in Harlan's Creek noticed him. That was the thing about Dex Morrow. He had cultivated, over the course of 3 years in that town, a quality of presence so carefully calibrated that it registered just below the threshold of attention. He was there, visibly, in the way that a fence post is visible, acknowledged at some peripheral level, assigned no particular significance, moved past without consideration. He sat at the corner table at the saloon every evening. He took his meals at odd hours when the diner was quiet. He worked occasional days at the livery of the lumber yard or wherever an extra pair of hands was needed and accepted, doing the work competently and without conversation and leaving when it was done. He rented a room above the hardware store, the smallest one, at the back, whose window looked out over the alley and, at an angle, over a portion of Birch Street. People in Harlan's Creek had the usual vague impressions: quiet, capable, kept to himself, probably had a past he wasn't advertising, which described half the men in any western town, and therefore distinguished nobody. They were right about the past. They were wrong about the keeping to himself, because from the corner table at the saloon, Dex Morrow had a clear line of sight to the front door of the millinery shop across the street. The shop owned and operated by a woman named Ellie Marsh, who arrived every morning at 7:15 and left every evening at 6, whose routine he knew with the precision of someone who had been paying attention to it for 3 years, and whose safety he had been quietly, invisibly, comprehensively ensuring for every one of those 3 years. Nobody knew this, Ellie Marsh least of all. She walked past him sometimes, past his corner table, past his position at the bar, past whatever unobtrusive location he had placed himself in, with the pleasant, slightly distracted manner of a woman whose mind was usually occupied with something specific and who acknowledged the people around her without particularly seeing them. She had never once looked at him in a way that suggested she saw him specifically. He was part of the furniture of Harlan's Creek, and the furniture didn't require attention. That was exactly how he needed it. That was exactly what was about to become impossible to maintain. The story of Dex Morrow that Harlan's Creek had assembled was thin, because Dex Morrow had given it very little material to work with. He was 36. He had come from somewhere south, Colorado, maybe, or further. Nobody was certain, because he had never said, and the manner in which he had not said it discouraged follow-up questions. He had no family in the area, and did not speak of family elsewhere. He was not unfriendly, precisely, would answer a direct question with a direct answer, would return a greeting with a greeting, but the responses never opened into anything, never created the gap through which further conversation could enter. Cold, people said. Distant, one of those men who came west to leave something behind and succeeded so thoroughly at leaving it that they left most of themselves with it. Tom Briggs at the saloon, who had the amateur psychologist's habit of theorizing about his customers, had the theory that Dex Morrow was a man in mourning for something he'd never named. He cited the way Dex sat, always with his back to the wall, always with a clear view of the door and the window, but never with the aggressive vigilance of a man afraid of trouble, more like a man keeping watch, the specific, patient quality of someone who has taken on a responsibility and is not taking it lightly. Tom Briggs was, without knowing it, exactly right. The responsibility had a name. Her name was Ellie Marsh, and Dex Morrow had known her for 7 years, 4 years before Harlan's Creek, in a different life, in a different state, in circumstances that had ended badly enough to send her west alone and send him west behind her, not in pursuit but in protection, at a distance she was unaware of, for reasons that had begun as a promise and had become, over 3 years, something more complicated than a promise. He had made the promise to a dying man. The man's name was Robert Marsh. He had been Ellie's husband, and he had been Dex's closest friend, the kind of friend made in youth that becomes structural, load-bearing, the kind that holds up parts of you that would collapse without it. Robert had been sick for a year before the end, and in the last weeks he had held Dex's hand and said the thing that dying men say when they have someone they trust and someone they love, And those two people are in the same room, he had said. Watch over her. She doesn't know how much danger she's in. She thinks it's over, but it's not. Watch over her until it is. Dex had said he would. He had kept that promise with a thoroughness that Robert, who had known him well, would have found either moving or excessive, or both. The danger Robert had referred to was specific. A man named Graff who had done business with Robert in ways that had gone wrong and who had, in the aftermath of going wrong, settled his dissatisfaction in Robert's direction with a persistence that had outlasted Robert himself. Graff had been the reason Ellie left, had been the reason she'd come to Harlan's Creek under a slightly different name. Marsh had been her mother's name, not Robert's, and had built a quiet life that depended on nobody knowing where she'd come from. Dex was the only person in Harlan's Creek who knew. He was also, for 3 years, the only thing standing between Ellie Marsh and the possibility that Graff would eventually find her. He stood there quietly, invisibly, asking for nothing, while she made hats and sold them and built a life and had absolutely no idea. The work was invisible by design. That was the discipline of it, not just the doing, but the doing in a way that left no fingerprints, created no questions, generated no trail that led back to him, and therefore no trail that might eventually lead someone to wonder why he was interested in Ellie Marsh and follow that wandering to places he couldn't afford them to go. He had gotten good at it. The two men who had come through Harlan's Creek in the first year, passing through was how they'd presented themselves. But passing through men don't spend 3 evenings watching a millinery shop from across the street, had left without incident, which was the intended outcome, achieved through a private conversation in an alley behind the livery, that Dex had initiated with the calm specificity of a man who knows exactly what he wants to communicate and exactly how much force is required to communicate it. They had ridden out the next morning before dawn. Nobody had seen this. The fence on the east side of Ellie's property, the fence that backed onto an alley that a person with bad intentions might use as approach, had been repaired 3 times in 3 years. Always overnight, always without note or explanation. Ellie had mentioned it once to May Cutler at the diner, in the vague, slightly mystified way of someone accounting for good luck, said she didn't know who kept fixing it, but whoever it was saved her the expense. May had said probably one of the neighbors, and Ellie had said probably, and neither of them thought about it further. The winter 2 years ago, when the cold had come hard and early and Ellie's woodpile had been clearly insufficient, he'd seen it in October, done the arithmetic, and understood it would not last past December. He had arranged, through a chain of transactions that could not be followed back to him, for a cord of firewood to be delivered to her door, with a note attributing it to a community fund that did not exist, but that was plausible enough not to be questioned. She had written a thank you note to the sheriff's office, assuming they administered the fund. The sheriff, confused, but not inclined to complicate matters, had said she was welcome. The drunk who had decided, one April evening, that Ellie's shop window was a good place to stand and make comments at volume. Dex had been across the street and had crossed it at the measured pace of a man taking a walk, and had said 2 sentences to the drunk very quietly, and the drunk had decided, upon reflection, to be somewhere else. Ellie had come to the door of her shop to find the street empty, the man gone. She'd looked up and down the street with a slightly puzzled expression, and then gone back inside. Dex had returned to his position across the street. He had never once considered telling her. The reasons were several, and all of them were real. If she knew he was watching, she would ask why. If she asked why, he would have to tell her about Graff, about what Robert had known, and what Robert had asked him to do. And telling her would mean she would know that the safety she believed she'd built here was conditional, that the quiet life in Harlan's Creek existed in the shadow of something she'd been trying to put behind her. Robert had specifically said, "Don't frighten her. She's frightened enough. Just keep her safe." So he kept her safe and kept her unknowing, and sat at his corner table and watched her walk past and told himself. On the evenings when the telling was harder than others, that this was the shape of the promise and the promise was the point and the point was her safety and her safety was sufficient. He almost believed it. He saw the man ride into Harlan's Creek on a Wednesday afternoon in September. He recognized him from a description but had given him years ago, had always known the face secondhand, from words, and found now that Robert's description had been accurate. A heavy-set man, medium height, the kind of face that had been arranged by life into an expression of permanent calculation, eyes that moved before the rest of him moved, the habit of assessment, so ingrained it was visible from across a street. The man's name was Kratt. He worked for Graff, or had 3 years ago. The relationship might have changed in form, but probably not in substance, because men like Graff kept men like Kratt close as long as they were useful, and Cray had the quality of sustained usefulness. He did not ride straight to the millinery shop. He was smarter than that. He went to the saloon and ordered a drink, and sat with it and looked around the room with those calculating eyes in the way of a man who has arrived somewhere for a purpose and is taking the measure of the place before moving toward it. He asked Tom Briggs, in a casual way, about the town, how long it had been here, what kind of people. Was it the kind of place where strangers got noticed? Tom Briggs said it was a friendly town, that strangers were generally welcomed, that it was quiet mostly. Cray nodded, satisfied with this answer, and ordered another drink. Dex was at his corner table. He had been at his corner table when Cray rode in, had identified him in the first minute, and had spent the subsequent minutes doing the arithmetic of the situation with the focused calm of a man who has been preparing for a possibility for 3 years and is now in it. Cray didn't know Dex. There was no reason he would. Their paths had never crossed directly, and Dex's connection to Robert Marsh was not something that had ever entered the official record of anything. This was an advantage. It was currently his only advantage, and he intended to keep it. He watched Cray finish his drink and leave the saloon, watched him walk the main streets of Harlan's Creek with the unhurried assessment of someone mapping a place, noting exits, noting distances, noting the position of things. He watched him stop across from the millinery shop and look at it for a moment with an expression that Dex, from across the street, could read clearly, and that settled something cold in his chest. Cray knew where she was. He had found her, and he was here to do something about it. The question was when. Dex had been in enough situations to know that men like Cragg did not move immediately. They watched first, learned the routine, identified the moment of least resistance, the patience of the predatory. It would not be today, but it would be soon. Dex went back to his room that evening and sat on the edge of the bed and thought through what was available to him. He could go to the sheriff, but the sheriff would ask questions he couldn't answer without revealing Ellie's history, which was the thing he'd spent 3 years protecting. He could confront Cray directly, but confronting Cray would tip Graff that someone was watching, which would either accelerate the timeline or bring more people. He could tell Ellie, but telling Ellie meant telling her everything, and telling her everything meant destroying the life she'd built on the foundation of not knowing. He sat with these options for a long time, and then he accepted, in the quiet of the small room above the hardware store, that the moment he had been preparing for without wanting it to arrive had arrived, that there was no longer a version of this that kept him invisible, that the promise he had made was about to require more of him than watching from a distance. He was ready. He had been ready for 3 years. Cran moved on the 4th night. Dex had expected it by then, had watched him for 3 days, tracked the pattern of his movements, understood the shape of what he was planning. Cray had identified Ellie's routine, had noted that she sometimes stayed late at the shop on Thursdays when a shipment came in and required sorting, had walked the alley behind the property twice at hours when the alley was empty. Dex had spent the 3 days making his own preparations. He had not slept on Thursday night. He had positioned himself, before the sun went down, in the shadows at the corner of Birch Street, close enough to the millinery shop to respond and far enough from the lamplight to be invisible. He had checked his weapons, and then not thought about his weapons, because thinking about them was not useful and being present was. He heard Cray before he saw him. The alley behind the shop was dark, the kind of dark that a new moon and overcast sky conspire to produce, and Cray moved through it with the practiced quiet of someone who had done this kind of thing before. He had a companion Dex hadn't identified, a second man, shorter, who had arrived in Harlan's Creek the previous afternoon and had met Crap at the saloon with the non-greeting of two people who know each other and are pretending not to. Two men. Dex stepped out of the shadow and into the alley. He didn't announce himself. There was no value in announcement. Announcement gives the other person time to decide what to do, and he wanted to be the one deciding what happened next. He was simply there, between Cray and the back door of the shop. In the dark, Cray stopped. The second man stopped. There was a moment, the specific held moment of a situation that has not yet determined what it is going to be. The moment between before and after. And in that moment Dex said, quietly and without heat, "You need to leave. Both of you, tonight, not tomorrow." Cray had the calculating eyes and the patience of a predator, and he used both now, looking at Dex in the dark, with the assessment of someone determining the nature of the obstacle. "Who are you?" Cray said. "That doesn't matter," Dex said. "It matters to me," Cray said. "Then let me tell you what else matters," Dex said. "The sheriff of this town is named Beaumont. He's currently awake. I had a conversation with him this afternoon about suspicious activity in this town, including the names of two specific strangers who have been observing a specific property. He's expecting either a report from me that the situation resolved or a gunshot that will bring him running." He paused. "This can end with you leaving, or it can end with Beaumont asking you a great many questions in a jail cell. I'm indifferent to which." Silence. Cray's calculating eyes did their work. "Graff won't forget this," Cray said. "Tell Graff," Dex said, "that the woman he's looking for left Harlan's Creek 6 months ago. Tell him she's gone further west and nobody here knows where. Tell him the trail's cold." He held Cray's gaze. "It's a better outcome for everyone than what you came here for tonight." Another silence. Longer. The second man was looking at Crap, waiting. Cray looked at Dex for a long, deliberate moment. The look of a man deciding whether the obstacle in front of him is worth the cost of removing it, and concluding, with the pragmatic arithmetic of someone who has done this kind of calculation before, that it is not. He turned. He walked back down the alley. The second man followed. Dex stood in the dark and listened to their footsteps recede, and then was quiet and did not move for a long time, because the body needs a moment after these things, and denying it the moment is its own kind of damage. He had not fired a shot. He had not needed to, but he had been ready to, and they had known he was ready, and that had been the whole of it. He exhaled slowly. Behind the back door of the shop, he could hear Ellie moving, the sound of boxes being shifted, the particular rhythm of someone working late, entirely unaware of what had just happened 12 feet from where she stood. He stood there for a moment and listened to the ordinary sound of her working. Then he walked back to his position on Birch Street and waited until the lamp in the shop went out and her footsteps went down the front walk, and the sound of her door closing at home carried through the quiet night. And then he went back to his room above the hardware store and sat on the edge of the bed and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something that might have been the beginning of the end of a vigil. It was Beaumont who connected the pieces, not immediately. The conversation Dex had had with him on Thursday afternoon had been carefully vague, enough to make the threat credible to Crane, without revealing enough to make Beaumont curious in the wrong directions. But Beaumont was a careful man, and careful men notice when the strangers who were observed on Tuesday are gone by Friday without apparent reason, and when the man who mentioned them Thursday afternoon is someone whose presence in Harlan's Creek has never quite added up. He came to find Dex on Saturday morning. He asked his questions in the direct, unadorned way of a sheriff who has decided to ask questions and is not interested in being managed. Dex looked at him for a long moment, doing his own arithmetic dot, and then he told him, not everything, not the parts that were Ellie's to know first, but enough. The man named Graff, the threat that had followed Ellie Marsh from her previous life. 3 years of watching and ensuring, the specific incidents, the men in the first year, the fence, the Thursday night in the alley. Beaumont listened without interrupting, which was either professional discipline or shock. Dex couldn't tell which. When Dex finished, Beaumont was quiet for a moment. 3 years, he said. Yes, Dex said. She doesn't know any of this, Beaumont said. No, Dex said. Beaumont looked at him with the expression of a man calibrating several things simultaneously. She needs to know, he said, what you did Thursday. Graff isn't going to stop. He may send more people. She needs to know the situation. I know, Dex said. Will you tell her, or should I? Beaumont said. Dex thought about it for a long moment. I'll tell her, he said. He went to the millinery shop that morning. The first time he had walked through the front door deliberately, with intention, rather than past it or near it or angled toward it from across the street. The bell above the door rang when he entered. Ellie looked up from behind the counter with the pleasant, professional attention of a woman greeting a customer, and then her expression shifted. Not alarm, but adjustment. The recalibration of someone who has just noticed something unexpected. She knew his face. He understood now that she had always known his face, in the way you know the furniture of a place, the recurring presences of a town, but she had not, until this moment, looked at him specifically. She was looking at him specifically now. Mr. Morrow, she said. She knew his name, which meant she'd known it for a while and simply not had occasion to use it. Mrs. Marsh, he said. I need to tell you something. Several things. I'm sorry, it's going to be a lot to take in. She put down what she was working on. She looked at him with the steady, clear-eyed attention that he had watched from across the street for 3 years, and had never been the direct object of, and the directness of it was unexpectedly significant in a way he hadn't prepared for. Sit down, she said. She said it in the tone of a woman who has decided that whatever is coming she will receive sitting down. Tell me. He sat, he told her. He told her about Robert's last weeks and the promise he'd made, and what Robert had known about Graff that he hadn't told her. He told her about the 3 years in Harlan's Creek, the invisible watch, the 2 men in the first year, the fence, the wood, the drunk on the April evening. He told her about Cray arriving on Wednesday, about Thursday night in the alley, about what he'd said and what had happened after. He told her all of it, plainly and in order, without editorializing or softening, because she deserved the plain version, and he had been withholding things from her for 3 years, and was not going to withhold anything now. When he finished, the shop was very quiet. She was looking at the counter in front of her. The fence, she said. Double quotes. Yes, he said. The wood that winter, she said. Yes, he said. The man outside in April, she said. Yes, he said. She was quiet for a long moment. Robert asked you to do this, she said. Yes, he said. But I want to be honest with you. I would have done it anyway. Robert asking gave it a structure, but I would have done it anyway. She looked up at him. It was a complicated look, grief in it, for Robert, for the years, for everything she'd been unaware of, something else too, something she hadn't sorted out yet, and that he wasn't going to try to name for her. Why didn't you tell me? She said. Robert said not to frighten you, he said. He said you'd been frightened enough. She considered this. He was right, she said quietly. And he was wrong. A pause. He was right that I was frightened. He was wrong to think knowing would have been worse than not knowing. She looked at her hands. I've been building this life on a foundation I didn't know was there. She stopped. That's a strange thing to find out. I know, Dex said. I'm sorry I didn't. Don't, she said. Not unkindly. Don't apologize for keeping a promise to a dying man. That's not something to apologize for. They sat in the quiet of the shop, with the morning light coming through the front window and the ordinary sounds of Harlan's Creek going about it Saturday outside. What happens now? she said. With Graf, Beaumont is handling it, Dex said. He has connections with the territorial marshal. Graf has been operating for a long time, and there's enough to move on him now if the right people know where to look. He paused. It may take time, but Cray believed me when I told him you'd left. It buys some. She nodded slowly. And you, she said. What do you do now? He looked at her. That depends, he said, on what you want. The town found out the way towns always find out, through the particular combination of Beaumont being less discreet than Dex had hoped, May Cutler being more perceptive than anyone accounted for, and the general impossibility of keeping a significant secret in a community of 200 people, where everyone's business was everyone's ambient awareness, within a week of Saturday morning. Harlan's Creek knew. The reaction was the reaction of a community confronting something it hadn't known to look for, a mixture of surprise and retroactive recognition. People remembering small things that suddenly made sense, the fence and the wood, and the man in April clicking into a pattern that had been there all along and invisible. Tom Briggs at the saloon revised every theory he'd ever had about Dex Morrow and arrived at a new one that was, for once, accurate. A man who cared about something so much that he'd organized his entire life around it, caring without asking for anything in return, which was either the most admirable thing Tom had ever heard of or the saddest, and was possibly both. People began treating Dex differently. This was uncomfortable for him, ways he found difficult to manage. He was equipped for invisibility, had refined it into a practice over 3 years, and the sudden visibility of people's regard was disorienting in the way that sudden light is disorienting to someone who has been in the dark. May Cutler brought him a pie and an expression of the kind that doesn't require verbal accompaniment. Old Jenkins at the feed store shook his hand with a firmness that conveyed respect without requiring him to accept a speech about it. Even the Calloway brothers, who had never previously acknowledged him beyond the minimum social exchange, came by and stood awkwardly in his vicinity for long enough to communicate that they thought well of him now. He accepted all of it with the minimal grace of a man who had not wanted to be noticed, and was being noticed anyway, and could see no way out of it. Ellie came to find him on a Tuesday evening. Not at the saloon. She knew now what the corner table meant, and she had the sensitivity to make him perform the transition from watcher to watched in the room where the watching had happened. She came to the room above the hardware store, which she had never been to, that knew the location of, because she knew a great deal more about Dex Morrow now than she had a week ago. He opened the door, and she was standing there with an expression that was composed and direct and contained several things he couldn't read. Yet, "Can I come in?" she said. "Yes," he said. It was a small room. There wasn't much in it. The bed, a chair, a small table with a lamp, a saddlebag that contained what he owned. She looked around it with the eyes of someone seeing where a person lives and understanding something from it. "You've been living like this," she said, "for 3 years. It's what I needed," he said. "Why?" she said. "That's the thing I keep coming back to, not the protecting. I understand the protecting. I understand the promise, and I understand that you're the kind of man who keeps a promise. But why like this? Why so?" She looked for the word. "Invisible. Why not just be here? Be a person in this town who knows me and looks out for me. Why the distance?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because if I was close to you," he said, "I would want things, and wanting things would compromise the judgment I needed to keep you safe." He paused. "I couldn't be both. I chose to be the one that mattered more." She looked at him. "And now," she said. "Now the situation is different," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." She sat in the chair, the only chair, which left him standing, which he didn't mind. "Robert loved you," she said. "You know that. He talked about you, not often, but when he did it was with the kind of regard that doesn't have a smaller word than love." She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. He asked the right person. He knew he was asking the right person. Dex said nothing. "I'm angry at him a little," she said, "for not telling me, for deciding what I could and couldn't handle. Both of you decided that. And I wish you hadn't. She said it without heat, as a fact. But I understand it, and I'm not going to spend my energy being angry at a dead man and a live one who spent 3 years of his life keeping me safe. She paused. That's not where I want to put my energy. Where do you want to put it? He said. She looked at him steadily. I'd like to know you, she said. The actual you. Not the corner table. Not the person across the street. The person who made a promise to my husband and kept it for 3 years in a cold room above a hardware store without asking for anything. She paused. I think that person is worth knowing. He looked at her for a long moment. He's not particularly interesting, he said, compared to the version of him that's been circulating. She almost smiled. Let me decide that, she said. The territorial marshal came to Harlan's Creek in October. He came because Beaumont had sent the right information to the right people, and the right people had found that Grath's operation had been providing grounds for federal interest for some time, and that the current moment was, finally, the moment. It took another 3 months after that. The machinery of law moves slowly when it moves at all, but by January the information Dex provided, combined with what had been accumulating elsewhere, was enough. Grath was arrested in February. Beaumont brought Dex the news himself, on a Wednesday morning, with the manner of someone delivering something they're glad to deliver. Dex received it quietly. He sat with it for a moment, then he said, It's done. Then, it's done, Beaumont said. He went to tell Ellie. She was in the shop, where she almost always was in the mornings, and she looked up when he came through the door with the expression she'd developed over the preceding months of knowing him, a particular quality of attention, warm and direct, that he was still getting used to being the object of. He told her. She was very still for a moment. Then she exhaled, long and complete, the exhale of someone releasing something they've been holding 4 years without knowing how much of themselves was occupied by the holding. It's over, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him. What does that mean for you? She said. For us, it was the first time she'd said us, which was something that had been arriving slowly over the previous months, not with drama or declaration but in the accumulation of mornings when he came by the shop and evenings when they had dinner and walks on Sunday afternoons when Harlan's Creek was quiet and they talked the way people talk when they're learning each other without pressure. He had learned her the way he'd always wanted to learn her, directly, as a person rather than a subject of protection, her mind and her humor and her opinions and the specific quality of her courage, which was considerable and which she wore without displaying. She had learned him, which was a stranger experience. Being known by her was different from anything he'd prepared for. She was thorough about it, asked questions he hadn't been asked in years, received his answers without judgment, returned with follow-up questions that meant she'd been thinking about it. She was assembling him. He understood, the same way he'd spent 3 years observing her, carefully, with full attention, with the intention of knowing the real thing rather than the surface. He was not used to being known. He was finding out that he did not object to it. It means I'm not here because of a promise anymore, he said. I'm here because I want to be. If that's how he stopped, found his way through it, which was not his strongest skill, but he was working on it. If that changes anything about whether you want me here. She looked at him with those clear eyes that had always seen him more accurately than he'd wanted to be seen, first from the distance of someone who didn't know she was being watched, and now from the distance of someone who was choosing to close it. It doesn't change anything, she said. It makes it simpler. He thought about 3 years in a cold room above a hardware store, about the corner table at the saloon and the clear line of sight to this door, about the fence and the wood and the Thursday night in the alley, about a promise made to a dying man that had become, over time, something that outgrew the promise. He thought about Ellie Marsh walking past him for 3 years with the pleasant, distracted manner of a woman whose mind was elsewhere and who had never once looked at him and seen him. She was looking at him now, he thought. Robert knew. Robert, who knew them both, had known. he crossed the distance. Harlan's Creek gave Dex Morrow the particular gift that small towns give to people they have decided to claim. The gift of being woven in. He became, over the year that followed, part of the fabric of the place in the way that people become part of a fabric when a community decides they belong there and won't let them argue about it. The corner table at the saloon became, by common understanding, his, but the meaning of it changed. It was no longer a watching post, but a seat, a regular place, with people who sat nearby and talked to him and expected him to talk back. He talked back. He was not natural at it, and then he was better at it, and then, gradually, in the way of things that are practiced, he was good enough at it. He and Ellie did not rush anything. They were both, in different ways, people who had learned the course of rushing, who understood that the good things were built slowly, and that the slowness was not reluctance but respect. They built it slowly, on a Sunday in the spring, on one of their afternoon walks at the edge of town where the valley opened up and the sky went wide, and the particular beauty of that country was available without obstruction. He told her that he loved her, not as a declaration that required a response, but as a fact that had been true far long enough that not saying it had started to feel dishonest. She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him. "I know," she said. "I think I've known for a while." She paused. "I love you too. I think I've known that for a while too." He looked at her. "We're not very fast," he said. She smiled, her full smile, which he had seen from across a street for 3 years and up close for one, and which was one of the things he intended to spend the rest of his life being close enough to see. "We got here," she said. "That's what matters." They stood at the edge of Harlan's Creek in the spring afternoon, and the valley was wide and the sky was clear and the danger was gone and the promise was kept, and what remained was simply this: to people who had found each other by an unlikely route, standing in the light, with time ahead of them. It was enough. It was, by any measure that mattered, more than enough. The greatest acts of love are often invisible. They happen in alleys, in the dark, and in cold rooms, and in the small daily choices of a person who has decided that someone else's safety matters more than their own comfort, their own recognition, their own need to be known. They happen without applause and without acknowledgement, and sometimes without the knowledge of the person being loved. And they ask for nothing, not because they deserve nothing, but because the doing of them is its own entirety. That is what it looks like when someone truly watches over you. Quiet. Constant. And asking for nothing in return. If this emotional cowboy story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. Have you ever discovered that someone was helping or protecting you without asking for recognition? If you enjoy Western redemption stories, silent heroes, emotional rescues, and unforgettable cowboy tales, don't forget to like, subscribe to Broken Spur Stories, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories of courage, sacrifice, and heart.